This tech note presents the procedure to implement dynamic and interactive val codes. Let me show you what I mean by that. Two drop-down lists. The first selects the type, the second selects the animal. Type 1 canine is the default type. The animal's display depends on the type selected. The return button allows another selection of the same type, while the cancel button resets type to default. The cancel button was clicked back to the default type. The test val code table that we're going to be using is going to contain animals which will be grouped into categories. The fields for this table are the following: code, which uniquely identifies the item; description, which provides a more human readable description of the item; a minimum entry, which is the minimum number of characters that the user must enter for the application to uniquely identify the item; and special processing. We'll talk more about special processing later. The first step is to create the val code table. This can be done either using the Colleague UI or Colleague Studio. If using the Colleague UI, use the val form. Make sure that student is selected and you type in the name of the form, and you click the add button since this val code table does not exist. After that, you just enter the items one by one, and lastly you click the save all button. Now if using Colleague Studio, then you right click the project in the Studio Explorer, select new and select validation table. After that, this screen will appear. Make sure that you select student, the name of the table, and that it is releasable, and lastly you click finish. This will create the table but not the items. To create the items, in the overview panel, click on validation items. Once that is clicked, another screen opens and you use the add button. The add button creates a dummy item. So as you can see here, this is not the data that we want. It's just a matter of editing these three and continuing using the add button to create each item. Here I already have 3 as an example, and I have the correct data entered. Once the val code table has been created and saved, the next step is to check it and export it. This is very important and must never be forgotten. If this step is not done, the val code table will not be out in the environment and will not be recognized by the Colleague UI. To check out and export, it's really simple. Now you right click the table name, then you select team, and then you select export checkout new resource. Before moving forward, I want to back up a little to the overview tab of the val code table. Okay, here it is. I want to discuss this guy here, the maximum size of the internal code. As I mentioned earlier, there is an internal code that uniquely identifies each item, and the code has a certain size. The smallest one was probably cat, C-A-T, and others of 3 characters, and the largest one was tiger of 5 characters. It is very important to let Colleague Studio know the size of the biggest or the longest internal code. In this case, it is tiger with 5 characters, so please, you need to enter that number right here. Just a further note, let's have a look at 2 other fields in this overview tab. This is the release module and the purpose. The purpose is really an optional text describing the val code table. Although optional, it is recommended that something be typed in here so that people looking at this screen will know what the val code table is for. And as far as release modules, if there is nothing here, it's going to assume that it's using all of them. So that's not always a good idea. It's good to actually use the add button and add just the modules that will be using this this val code table. For this example, I'm just going to add base, but that comes later on. Moving ahead, the next task is to design and create the UI form. So to do this, we're just going to go ahead and we are going to right click the project name, select new, select the process, and then enter the necessary data in this screen. Of course, since we want a UI form, we're going to select a UI form process. Right after the form is created, the first thing to do is to check out and export. As mentioned earlier, this is a very important step for each of the elements created in Colleague Studio. To check it out is not a problem. Just right-click the form name, select Team, and then Export Checkout New Resource. Now we can start modifying the form. The first thing we're going to do is that we're going to remove the argument aperson.id. This argument is usually necessary because most of the forms that are created will be somehow linked to the person entity. But in this case, this example is totally separate from that, so we don't have a problem removing it. I just select it and click Remove. The next step is to actually modify the elements on the form. So we have to go to Form Designer, just click on this tab. And as you can see right away is that Form Designer automatically puts in this header, and we have to remove the header. It is not necessary. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select each one of these separately and just right click and select Delete. Note that for the one selected and these guys here, we need to use the Select tool. However, for this one here, we need to use the Select Window tool, so don't forget that. Now to start adding fields. Here's, you'll notice I already added a label to identify the first drop-down as type. What we're going to do right now is that we're going to add a dynamic valcodes ID item. So to do that, click on Field, start typing in the name, and when the list appears, just select the dynamic valcodes ID item. This item was going to be placed on the form. I just put it anywhere. I put it on top of the label. But now what we need to do is to convert it into a phantom field. So to do that, make sure that the item is selected. Go to the Attributes tab and simply check the phantom field box, and that should do it. Now let's add the var1 field that will be our drop-down. So back at the Form Designer, click on the field option and start typing var1. Select from the list of necessary. That will place it on the UI form. Just move it to wherever you want. It could be to the side or underneath the type, and then just click it to drop it. We are almost ready to start adding code, but before we do, I want to discuss the variables that are used, which are these guys here. The first one, the rAnimal type, that's the valcode table variable. That is very necessary. The next two are lists, and they hold the internal code and the description. And the last two variables are actually the valcode table name and the valcode table key. Knowing about these variables is very important later on. Now to add the code, we're going to be adding the code in two different locations. The first location is in the event hooks of the UI form. So click that tab at the bottom of the UI form and go to process entry. The code that we're going to be adding is precisely this. After that's done, then we go off to the process repeat and add the following code, and then finally we go off to process cancel and we add basically the same code as we did in the step before. Now we're going to add code to the forms components. So we're going to go back to the form designer, and we're going to make sure that the ID field is selected. After that, we're going to go to the right tab and we're going to locate the field accept hook and click that. It should be empty, and this is the code that goes there. Next, we need to connect the var1 field to the valcode table. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to the form designer, make sure that the select tool is selected, and then make sure that the var1 field is selected. After that, we're going to go to the pane on the right hand side, and we're going to make sure that the attributes tab is selected. Once all that is done, we scroll down a bit and we locate the validation field. And in this field, we're going to type all this in, and this will connect the var1 field to the valcode table. The last task that we need to perform is to verify that the field sequence is correct. To do this, click on the UI form anywhere that's blank. When that happens, the UI form field sequence will display. Now, what is important here is for the dynamic valcode ID to be first and then followed by var1. This is particularly important in our case. It may vary depending on how you decide to implement this functionality. To test, first generate the code. Next, go to the colleague UI and enter the form's mnemonic. In my case, it is this. And once the UI form displays, click on the little triangle to open up the list. The three animal types should display. Now to add the next drop-down. However, before we do that, we should really check to make sure that the form is checked out. To do this, right-click the form name, select team, and then verify to see whether the form is checked out. In this case, as you'll notice, the option is grayed out, which means it is checked out. So we're good on that and ready to add the next field. The next field that we're going to add is the var2 field. However, what I did before is I first added a label, and then I went ahead and added the var2. I selected the field, and when the dialog came up, I just entered var2 or selected it from the list, and then I clicked OK, and I was done with that. Before we make the form interactive, let's first connect it to the valcode table to just make sure everything is working. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that the var2 field is selected, and on the right hand side I'm going to make sure the attributes is selected, and then I'm going to scroll down to validation, and there I'm going to use the add button, and I am going to select the valcode table name, which in this case is animals. And now we're ready to test. Generate the code, go back to the colleague UI, enter the mnemonic, whichever is your case, and now you should have two different drop downs. When you open up the second one, you should get the entire list of animals. Note right now that they are not interactive, so it doesn't matter what you select in one, the other one will simply just be independent of it. The first step to making the drop-down interactive is assigning a type to the animals. This is how it's going to work. This is the animals table, the valcode table. It contains all the animals. So usually when we connect the valcode table to a var field, all the animals get loaded into that drop-down. But what we want to do is we want to use the first drop-down, which would be this one, to select the type, and then have all the animals load into a buffer. And then when this process here has the information of the type that we selected and all the animals, the only animals that will be loaded into the drop-down are those that belong to the type that we selected. Although the valcode table that we created actually supports up to 5 types of animals, we're only going to use 3 of them. And what we're going to do is that we're going to assign the number 1, type 1 to canine, type 2 to feline, and type 3 to reptile. So to do this, we can go ahead and open a colleague UI session and go to val and make sure the ST, and then we type in the name of the table, which is animals. And as soon as it's on screen, we can start entering the numbers of the type right here. So like for example, this is a cat. If we look up here at our table, we see that if a cat is a feline, so it would be a type 2. So a 2 would go there. And for any animal that is a canine, it would be type 1. And of course we have one reptile, which is the boa, which would be of type 3. After we've done that, we go ahead and we just simply save all. Of course, we can also modify the special processing field in Colleague Studio. But first, we should really make sure that the valcode table is checked out. To do this, locate the valcode table and right-click it, select Team, and then check out. If this is if the valcode table is already checked out, that last option will be gray. Okay, so now in the middle pane towards the bottom, you're going to have the overview and the validation items. Click on the validation items. This will display a list of the items that are already in the Valcode table. So what we're going to do is that we're going to click one by one on each one of them, and we're going to be changing the action code 2 so that this number corresponds to the type corresponding to each of these items. Once that is done, we are ready to save. So you can either use the little diskette on the toolbar, or you can click on File and then click on Save. Of course, we mustn't forget to export the modifications of the Valcode table. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go back and locate the name of this Valcode table, and we're going to right click it, and we're going to select Export. This will display the dialog. Usually the information here is already correct, and all we need to do is click Finish. Although I'm not going to go into detail regarding field sequence, it's very important that you have a look at this section. This explains the field sequence and exactly what happens when different actions are taken inside the UI form. I'm hoping that this will shed some light as to how the field sequence works and what is important to have a certain sequence. Now to make the Valcode interactive. To do this, we're going to need a certain set of variables which are defined in this table. I have 3 new variables here. It is 3 lists which I call the master lists. The first list is going to hold all the animals' descriptions. The second list is going to hold all the internal codes of all the animals. And finally, this is the action code which corresponds to the type. We still have the same other 3 lists, which actually holds the internal codes, the descriptions, and the action code of the animals that corresponded to the type selected. And of course, we can't leave out the R animal names variable, which contains the Valcode table, and the Valcode table name and the Valcode table key. As usual, it's good to verify that the form is checked out, because we are now going to add an element to it. And the element that we're going to add to it is an ID field. We did not need it before because the animals Valcode table was linked directly to the var1, the var2 field. However, now that we're going to do some processing with it, we are going to need an ID field for it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the form designer. Then we're going to click on field, and we're going to start typing in the name, and the ID field that we're looking for is Dyn Valcode 2 ID. So select that, and once that is selected, place the field wherever you want it. I just placed it right next to the first ID field. And making sure that the second ID field is selected, go over to the right pane, make sure attributes is selected, and make it a phantom field. Now we're going to add code to make the drop-down list interactive. So we're going to go back to the form designer. We're going to make sure that the Dynaminc Valcode ID, which is this one here, is selected, and we're going to go over to the right pane and select field accept. This field accept hook already has a whole bunch of code, which is basically this. What we're going to do is that we're going to add the code that's highlighted here already. Once that is done, we're going to go back to the form designer, and we're going to select var1. Once var1 is selected, we're going to go to the right pane, and we're going to select field exit for var1. Once that is done, we're going to add this code here. Next, still being in var1, we're going to select the field output, and we're going to add this code. Okay, now next we're going to go back to the form designer. We're going to make sure the select tool is selected, and we're going to select the second ID. Once the second ID is selected, we're going to go to the right pane, and we're going to select the field accept. And in that field accept hook, we're going to type in this this line, which is here a little bigger. Now once that is done, we're going to go back to the form designer. Now we're going to select var2, and then we're going to go back to the right pane, and we're going to select field output, and we're going to enter this line of code. Now we are done with entering code inside the hooks of each individual component. Now we're going to add code to the hooks of the form itself. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go and make sure that the form is selected, which I believe at this time it is. And we're going to go down here and we're going to click on events and hooks, and then we're going to select process entry, and we are going to enter this code here. Now once that is done, we are next going to go to process repeat, and we're going to enter this new code here. In theory, this other code here should already be in there, but if it isn't, enter both of these statements. Once we're done with process repeat, now go to process cancel and enter the same code. Make sure that same code is in there. Now let's set up the two variables. First we're going to start with var1. We're going to go to Form Designer and select var1, and we're going to go over to the right pane, make sure attributes is selected, and here we're going to set up two different data items. First is the display size, which we want 12, and then secondly we want to add var2 to this to the field refresh list. So we're going to click on the add button and we're going to select var2 from the list that pops up. The var2 setup, we're going to make sure that var2 is selected now, and we're going to go back to attributes, and the validation is going to change a bit. And this is the new validation that needs to be entered in that field. Of course, the var2 display size is also important, so we need to go to the form properties of var2 attributes, and the display size that we're going to use is 22. The last step is to verify the field sequence. To do this, go back to Form Designer, click on any area of the UI form, and then on the right pane, the UI form field sequence list will be displayed. Now, whatever displays must be the same as this. It must first be the valcodes ID, followed by var1, then the valcodes ID 2, and then finally followed by var2. Use the up button, or if necessary the down button, to rearrange these so that they match how they are displayed here. Once that is done, we are now ready to generate the code and to test it in Colleague UI. If everything goes well, you will now have a fully functional interactive drop-down list. Well, we are done. I would recommend having a look at the epilogue. It does contain some interesting information. But enough theory. Let's go and do it. In Colleague UI, go to the val form. Make sure that the application is ST and click the OK button. Enter animals as the name or ID of the valcode table. I used animals 2 because the other already exists. Click Add. Here is where the valcode data is entered, such as the internal code, description, and minimum entry. Enter the internal code, enter the description, enter the minimum entry, enter the data for each item. Since Animals 2 is just a dummy table for illustrative purposes, I am canceling out of this data capture. Go back to val form, loading the existing animals valcode table. There it is. Note that the special processing field has been filled in. Go to page 2 and back to page 1. Colleague Studio can also be used to create a valcode table. Right-click project name, select New and then Validation Table. Select STS application and enter valcode table name. Leave release status as releasable. Again, using Animals 2 for example, click Finish button. Enter 5 for minimum size of internal code. Add necessary release modules, base for this example. Add short description of the valcode table. Complete with misspelling. Save the valcode table. There is Animals 2. Right-click valcode table. Select Team. Select Export Checkout New Resource. Fixed the misspelled word. Click on Validation Items. Click Add button to add an item. Edit dummy item with valid data. Internal code is cat, description house cat, and minimum input is C. Add the next item. One more for good measure. Tiger is the longest internal code, hence the value of 5 in the maximum size of internal code field in the Overview tab. Save the changes. Export the valcode table. Right-click on valcode table name, select Export Item. All is good here. Click the Finish button. Add new UI form. Right-click Processes. Select New. Process type should be UI form process. Enter process name, description, and mnemonic. Mnemonic is used in the colleague UI. Click Finish button. There's a new UI form. Right-click Form Name, select Team Item, select Export Checkout New Resource. Remove a.person.id entry argument. Select Item and click Remove button. Click Form Designer tab. If necessary, select Select Tool. For each header item, right-click and select Delete. Delete is grayed out. Select Window tool. Now right-click Item and select Delete. Return to Select tool. Right-click and delete. Add a label. Add the ID field variable for the first drop-down. Locate and select Dynamic Valcode's ID. Click OK button. Position and drop field by clicking mouse button. Verify that var ID field is selected. Go to the Attributes tab on the right pane. Check Phantom Field option. Note how the ID field auto-sizes. Add a var field for the drop-down. Enter or locate and select var1. Click OK button. Place and drop new var field. Click Events Hooks tab. Enter code for proc entry hook. I always put the code in the clipboard and then paste it in here. Click Press Repeat tab. Add new code. Copy the new code to the clipboard. Click the Cancel tab. I press this process. Paste in new code. Click Form Designer tab. Select Dynamic Valcode's ID field. Back in the right pane, Form Properties tab, click on Field Accept hook. Enter the code for this hook. Select var field. Back in the right pane, Form Properties tab, enter the validation string. This ties the dynamically built list to the var field, converting it into a drop-down list. Back in the Form Designer, click on any empty space. The UI Forms sequence list now displays. Verify that the ID field is before the var field. Generate the code. Generation results display. One records copy and no errors detected. This is good. Go to the colleague UI. Enter the mnemonic assigned to the form. Search for the form. There it is. And it works. Time to add the second drop-down. Add a label. Add a var field for the drop-down. Enter or locate and select var2. Place and drop new var field. Verify that var2 is selected. Back in the right pane, Form Properties tab, click on Attributes. Set the val code table by using the Validation Fields Browse button. Locate and select Animals val code table. Click Finish button. There it is. Generate the code. One records copy and no errors. Back in colleague UI, reload the session. Open the new UI form. It works, but the drop-downs are not interactive yet. Now to make the lists interactive, open the val code table with val form. Verify that the application is ST. The val code table is animals. The special processing field has already been filled out correctly. If needed, make changes, then click on Save All button. 1 is canine, 2 feline, 3 reptile. No modifications needed, just cancel out. In Colleague Studio, open the Animals 2 val code table. The special processing fields are called action codes 1 through 4. To add action code, select val code item and edit field. Save the val code table. Must never forget to export val code table after any modifications. This is what the finished val code table looks like. All the action codes have been set. Go back to the form designer of the UI form. Verify that the UI form is checked out. Yes, it is. Add second ID field. Enter or search and locate Dyn-valcode2 ID field. Place and drop new field. Verify that the new field is selected. Go to Attributes in the right panel. Attributes for Dyn-valcode2 ID. Check Phantom Field Attribute. Note that the field size changes. Add code to hook. Select Field Accept Hook. Add code. In the Form Designer, select var1 field. Add code to var1 hook. Select var1 field exit hook. Add code. Select var1 field output hook. Add code. Select Dyn-valcode2 ID field. Add code to Dyn-valcode2 ID hook. Select field accept hook. Add code. Select var2 field. Add var2 hook code. Select var2 field output hook. Add code. Back in Form Designer, select Events Hooks tab. Select Process Entry Hook. Add code. Select Process Repeat Hook. Add code. Select Process Cancel Hook. Add code. Click Form Designer tab. Select var1 field. Select Attributes. Set display size for drop-down text. Define field refresh field. Use button at right to select refresh field. Select var2 field. On Form Designer, select var2 field. Verify that Attributes is selected. Update validation to make var2 drop-down interactive. Set display size for drop-down text. In Form Designer, click on any empty space of the form. This field sequence is wrong. Select Din Valco 2ID item and use button at right to move it before var2. Select Dynamic Valcode's ID field. Select Field Accept hook. Add code to auto-select first var1 drop-down item. All done. Generate code. One record's copy and no errors. Yay! Go to Colleague UI and open Form. Clicking on Cancel resets type drop-down list to default item. And that's all.